So today we get the long-awaited, much-anticipated chapter 10 from Marquart, which will give us our excuse to talk about the one gospel ministry and auxiliary offices. Now, it's really easy to get bogged down in little stuff in the front of this chapter because there's some fun stuff in here, but I don't want to do that too much because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the auxiliary talk. That's kind of an important one. The first, most important thing that Marquart is saying in this chapter, and by the way, what do you think of this chapter? What are you thinking of Marquart by now? Are you liking him? Or are you finding him like 90% good, 95% good, or kind of an annoying kind of guy? What's your take on him by now? What do you think when you have to read Marquart? Are you thinking, oh cool, let's see what he has to say? Or you just don't even care, you just read it? Yeah, okay. What are you thinking? You liking Marquart? Yeah?
I'm enjoying it, but I'm more enjoying it when you explain it.
Oh, that's so gratifying. My position is secure. This is good. Okay, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. Okay, yeah, Stephen.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I mean, I think he makes really clear arguments, and he just takes you right down the line. There's no beating around the bush.
I agree. I think Marquart is an excellent example of theologian by individual. And like I told you, you have kind of two options of the way you're going to do theology. You can do theology by committee. Have I told you that in here yet? No, I didn't. Okay. This is one of my overarching theories of life in theology. There's theology by committee, and there's theology by individuals. And they're different. Theology by committee is what you get when you get an editorial board together, a group together, and they start pounding out documents and wordsmithing things and trying to figure out how to say things. And they're notoriously moderate and vapid. Wow, sometimes. And inoffensive, cautious, no edge. That's theology by committee. Give me an example of theology by committee. Thank you. You guys are quick studies. All right. CTCR documents, theology by committee, no doubt about it. Then you have theology by individuals. And theology by individual, you get all the idiosyncrasies of the dude who's writing it. And if he's got hang-ups, they keep on coming up. And if he's got things he's good at, they keep coming up. And so theology by individual, Pieper. That's theology by individual. As much as we, venerate it and laud it, it's still theology by individual. And Pieper's got his little Pieperisms going on. Some of them are good, some of them not so good, but they're there, okay? Marquart, theology by individual. And he's got his things, and he's got his whipping boys, and he goes after them, man. And then he's got his shtick, and he's good at it, especially his understanding of the church being this kind of bride of Christ. Not, living it up out in the world, not trying to be attractive to the world. This is one of his things he gets again and again, and I think he gets this right. So if you like kind of where he's coming from, you're going to like the guy. If you don't, you're going to find him annoying. But for my money, I'll take theology by individuals every day over theology by committee. Because I think theology by committee, it tends, just like I said, to be watered down and loses all the edge and loses all the fun of it. And theology by individual, you have to pay more attention. You got to keep your sifters on, but there's a lot more fun here. And I think sometimes a lot more trenchant insights that are really helpful. And that's what you get with Marquart. So keep that in mind as you're reading this stuff. All right, now, first big point that Marquart makes, and this is kind of the driving thing through a whole lot we're going to be talking about, is he argues, and by the way, just for the viewers at home, we're not doing this yet. This is the CTCR document we'll be getting to. This is my MO. I switched documents. Okay, just there you go. All right, now, his driving thing is, he says, how many offices do we have in the New Testament? He says one. Okay, so he says there is one office in the New T. And he says that office is what? It is the predigt amt. This is foundational to everything Marquart's going to argue. He argues that the New T gives us one office, and that office is the predigt amt, or what we would just call the office of the holy ministry, or what was Sauce's favorite Latin phrase he kept on using, the ministerium ecclesiasticum. Okay, and so we have the office of the ministry of the church, and so we have this predigt amt, what I have been calling in this class, and what I term it just for the sake of clarity is the office. And that's why I don't talk about the ministry, because ministry is way too generic and too confusing for most people. And even the office of the ministry, this becomes a bit of a mouthful. So I just usually shorten it to the office. But by now you're catching on. When I talk about the office, I'm talking about the office of the pastoral ministry, the predigt amt, this ministerium ecclesiasticum, the dude who's the absolution man. Okay? We all clear on that? Now, Marquart's argument is, he says, all of these different names we get in the New T, episcopus, poimen, presbyter, all of them are meaning the same exact thing, this. And he even throws who else into this? Which is maybe a little surprising.
Apostle.
Apostle even. And if anything, we might be tempted to say, now there's apostles, and then there's, pastors underneath that, the local elders. But he says, no. This is really all the same. And then he starts giving you some supporting evidence. Now, admittedly, if you're going to try to make a case based purely on Scripture for this, you're going to find yourself limping along. It's going to be a little hard because Scripture is just so thin on all this stuff. But you're also going to be just as hamstrung if you try to make a case, well, the Bible has many, many offices. You can't prove that either. I mean, you just can't. Because there are other sides you want to talk about, oh, no. We've got office of apostle, office of bishop, office of presbyter. And then you get some of these New Testament churches running around today, the non-denominationals, and we're going to reestablish the New Testament church here. So then they start figuring out, all right, who's our bishop? And who's our elder? And who's our shepherd? And who's our deacon? And who's our apostle? And you'll even get people running around talking about 21st century apostles, because we're a New Testament church, and they had apostles, so we've got apostles. And you're thinking, whoa, we're off in la-la land now. But this is what they're trying to do. And my argument is, I think Marquart perhaps is stretching beyond what scripturally can be said with absolute authority to say there's just one office in the New T. But I think the counter side is, no, there are many offices. I think that's also fallacious. Basically what you have in the New Testament is you have all these terms operating, and Marquart says, I think it's fair to say all of these are really operating in one concept idea of a man put into this place to be the guy who proclaims the gospel and brings it to the church. And I'm on board with that, frankly. I think that is a compelling argument. And I'm not willing to say it's 100% proven this has to be the right position. You can't give it a knockout blow, but I think it's the vast majority of evidence is pushing in that direction as far as I can tell in the New Testament, the way it operates, and even how the church operates later on. So I think this is on the right track. Now within this one office, you can have divisions and gradations and even different authorities, responsibilities given out. So a bishop might have more authority over a deacon someday down the road. But initially, let's be honest, there's a whole lot of latitude in these terms. And anybody who starts trying to tell you that, well, we're doing like New Testament bishops and New Testament this and this and this, don't even bother listening. Because the New Testament is so vague in its use of these terms and how the terms interchange, it doesn't mean a whole lot. But this is exactly the argument Marquart wants to make. There is one office in the New T. And then the reason I'm so attracted to this is it brings so much clarity to how we think about this. Because then the question is, are you in the office or are you not? That's it. And so a person is either in the office with the authority of the office, and that means he does word and sacrament ministry. That means he speaks with the authority of the church. That means he is an absolution man. Or he's not. Now, if he's not, must he remain silent? Of course not. We've established this, right? While he can't stand up and say, thus saith the Lord as a called and servant of the word, he can say, thus saith the Lord as a priest of Christ, right? Part of the priesthood of the baptized. So we're not talking about, I can't do some things. We're just talking about who's actually in this office. And for the sake of clarity, I think it is right to connect these. Now, also what's helpful here is then we see that the pastor today in the 21st century is simply the progression and the extension of the apostolic office. And what's cool about that is the continuity, and it also fits really well with this whole idea of this paradosis, the tradition with which we've been entrusted, the thing that's been handed down and handed down and handed down. And who's bearing that deposit of faith today? The church. And you, who are the vanguards of the church, and that's part of your burden. So the pastor's not just out there to set vision and be a people person and make everybody feel great. You're the one who's actually got the deposit of faith, and you're entrusted with that to pass it on to the next generation. Pretty serious business. That's your job. That's your task. And so you are really living out exactly what was going on there. Okay? Now, that's the first big point. Then Marquart makes it also quite interesting. He says, the apology, when it's going to say, what is the establishing of the office of the ministry, uses really weird Bible verses to prove this. This is page 121. Only Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and Isaiah 55:11, word does not return empty. Only those two are cited. And yet that no mere minister in the abstract as man is clear from the very next paragraph. It says, without biblical proof, the church has the command to appoint ministers. Now, I think it's right to say the reason the confessions don't build a scriptural argument for the office of the holy ministry is they didn't need to. They didn't need to. Nobody in 1530 was challenging the office of the holy ministry as a divine institution. It wasn't happening. The Radical Reformation would come a little later and some problems with that, but nobody's seriously challenging the office of the holy ministry, the divine aspect of it. Rome had no problem with that. So the confessions don't make a big case for this. This is important because you're going to have situations from time to time where you're going to have parishioners who are going to start pushing you a little bit on this, the office of the holy minister stuff. You're just quoting a whole lot of confessions here, but not much Bible. And you need to tell them, frankly, the confessions are not needing to build a strong case scripturally because they don't need to, because it's already there. And what's going on in confessions is consistent with the received text, with the received deposit of faith, I should say. All right, that's that. So that's the first big move. Then on page 123, we start getting some of the idiosyncrasies of Marquart. We also get on 123, don't miss this, footnote 11, one of Luther's many, many, many gems, but this is his sacristy prayer. And you should all be familiar with that. Many of you have seen this stuck on a sacristy wall in a church where you've been, or maybe at your home congregation or your fieldwork congregation. This is a good prayer. I encourage you to at least get a copy of it somewhere and stick it somewhere that you can run into it from time to time. It's a good prayer. You have appointed me in the church as bishop and pastor. Thou seest how unfit I am to attend to such a great and difficult office, and if it had not been for thy help, I would long since have ruined everything. Therefore I call upon thee. Of course, I want to put my mouth and heart to use. I shall teach the people, and I myself shall learn and shall meditate diligently on thy word. Use me as thy instrument. Only do not forsake me, for if I am alone, I shall easily destroy everything. This is spot on. And doesn't that nicely echo Sassa's whole thing about the two dangers of the pastor? One is being the conceit, and the other the pessimistic despair. And so we are totally relying upon him for everything, but he is at work through us. And I think that prayer captures it very nicely. All right, now on that same page, on this, by the way, is exactly why I think every pastor should have this attitude of this utter humility before God all the time. If I'm on my own, I'm sunk. But if God is at work in me, okay, we can do some things. This is exactly the right attitude to have. A few years ago, I preached the diploma service when the guys got their diplomas and got sent off. And I said in that sermon, my prayer is that you all go out and crash and burn. And I said, don't make a big stink about it, and don't make it cause too much constitute or perish. But I really hope you guys crash soon and fail, because as soon as you realize you're not going to accomplish anything, the better off you are, because then you're going to be forced to rely entirely upon God's grace and be forced into His arms, and that's exactly where you need to be. And I would be willing to bet most of you will experience pretty early on in your ministry a rather poignant crisis when it all comes pointing down and you're feeling like, I can't do this. Bingo, you're exactly where you need to be. That's good. So don't give up then. Just say, I was warned about this. It's okay. And just push back into Christ's arms and have at it. Don't stop. All right, page 123. Now we're talking about some of the idiosyncratic stuff. So this is the first complete paragraph, the only break on the page. Completely contrary to all this is the sectarian/activistic notion of the ministry as basically trainers of the laity. Marquart loves this, doesn't he? As if Christ had said not, feed my sheep, but organize my sheep into work brigades to do the real ministry themselves. Ouch! If the task of the ministry is not the distribution of gospel treasures, but something else, then it is no longer an evangelical institution in the sense of AC 5, but a legal and legalistic one. All right, now, who is in the crosshairs of Marquart here when he's all fired up at the turn of the last century writing this, or the turn of this most recent century? Who's in his crosshairs? What's the terminology he's after?
Church.
Yes. What do we call it?
Church growth.
The church growth movement. All right. And this has kind of crested, and it's not such a big deal anymore. But man, this was a big deal in the late 20th century. And when I was a student here, we had a class even called Church Growth Principles. Yeah, and we were taught church growth principles, and we read Wagner and Hunter and this stuff. Now, what's Marquart think of church growth stuff? Man, he hates it. He hates it. Boy, does he hate it. All right? And the footnotes are even more nasty. So we have down here, he just starts going hard after Hunter. And you have this footnote 12 that starts in the bottom 123 and carries over to page 124. But, man, you got to be a little sympathetic to Marquart, frankly. At least I am. So he's quoting Hunter. This starts on 123. This is Hunter, and Hunter was a kind of bona fide church growth dude who was widely read, and Marquart doesn't have a lot of use for this. So here's what Hunter wrote. There are 6 classes or kinds of workers in the Christian church. Growing, healthy, active churches have a different percentage of workers in certain classes than churches that are inactive and declining. Declining congregations have about 20% Class 1 workers, 1% Class 2 workers, and 75% Class 6 workers. About 40% of the members of a healthy congregation are volunteers within the church, Class 1. Class 2 workers, unpaid outreach workers, make up 20%. The growing, active church will have no more than about, and now Marquart, his little slam, a little exclamation point in square brackets, about 36% of its members is dead wood. 36? Where do you get that? Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm being Marquart. With any more than that, it could not be healthy. All right, now, you just heard from Hunter. How does that hit you? Besides being totally confused by all of his numbers.
Formulaic.
Very formulaic. It sounds like we're doing a business model. It sounds like we're doing science. It's like we're doing empirical research and imposing it on the church. And this is the crux of Marquart's problem. Now, this leads us into a little sidebar discussion which I want to have with you, which is what is the interface between first article realities and theological reality, trusting the Holy Spirit to do stuff. That's something you need to sort out and be aware of all the time. A lot of stuff you're going to learn is going to be what I would call first article realities. Things like, if people need to know where to go to the bathroom, there should probably be a sign on the door. Okay? Or if you want people to know where your church is, you might want to put a sign out that said, "This is my church," so people know where it is. Okay? That's first article reality. We can get more complicated, like the homogeneous unit principle of church growth movement, which is people tend to like to be with people that are like themselves. And so if you want to make a church grow, why don't you make a church that's aimed at blue-collar working people if you're in a blue-collar neighborhood. Or if you're in a neighborhood with kind of upper-crust people, kind of aim at that demographic. Or maybe if you're in a demographic that's kind of changing and you're getting a whole lot of Bosnian immigrants, then you probably should aim at doing a Bosnian church. And so you end up having the Bosnian church and the Hmong ministry and this ministry, and that's the homogeneous unit growth principle. All right, is that a first article reality? It is. We all know it. You like hanging out with people who are like you, right? Comfortable, easy, it's nice. Can you grow a church by focusing on that? Yeah, you can get your numbers up. Sure. Is that homogeneous unit principle a scriptural idea? No. In fact, it's opposed to the scripture. What does the Bible describe the church as? Every race, tribe, people all lumped together. And it's the leveling. Isn't this exactly what's celebrated in the first century churches? Paul talks about, hey, you guys are from all over the place demographically. Who cares? You're all in Christ. It's the antithesis of the homogeneous unit principle. And see, now this becomes the rub. And this is the stuff I want you guys to pay attention to. Because what Hunter is doing is he's doing what most of the church growth was saying, hey, you know what? If we take rules from the sciences, rules from sociology, rules from psychology, and rules from business and apply them to the church, they work. Duh! Because after all, the church is a human institution. Will human rules work in the church? Yeah, they will. Small groups, all the kind of stuff, things about, trying to generate excitement, advertising, manipulating people through blogs, whatever. It all works here just like it does out there. So can you take business principles and use them in the church? Yes. Will they produce results? Yes. Should we be doing it? Maybe not so fast. Because after all, the church is a little different than just a business or science, or social institution. So here's the tension that's going on here. And what Marquart is doing, I think, which is a good job for us, is he's calling attention to the danger of getting so caught up in our church growth stuff that we start to use it in a manipulative or in a formulaic way. That we think we can kind of control things. And we start ending up with all kinds of problems. And the church growth movement, for the good things it accomplished, and there are some, of making the church maybe think about some stuff it was doing and pay attention to some things a little more carefully, like maybe we should have clear signs, and maybe we should have accessible buildings. Maybe our buildings shouldn't look ugly when you walk in. That basic kind of stuff. So this is not it's not bad, the contributions here, and even paying attention to social realities about people and how they interact and what's going on there. For all the truth here, we have to be so careful that this does not start to run the show. And the biggest complaint I have is most of the time church growth starts to run the show because it's effective. And this falls prey to our strong American penchant for pragmatism. If it works, it's right. You know, that's the American way. And then we apply that in the church. Hey, look at this church. It just doubled its numbers. Who can argue with that? Well, I guess my response would be, I can argue with that. Because if it's not honoring God's truth, and if it's actually denigrating what the gospel is about, why do we want to be on board with that? And are we actually perpetuating the life of the church, or are we cutting it short for the sake of some kind of short-term goal? And that's what's kind of going on here. Now, you have to be careful, because you don't want to just throw out stuff, and then you start having the idea that, well, our church is really shrinking. I guess we're doing something right. You know, I hear that too, you know, some of that kind of mentality, you know, that, you know, who cares about the numbers? Who cares about the demographics? Who cares about first article stuff? And I think the reality is there's this tension of both things are at work. Because remember, the church is a human institution and a divine institution. It's going to be both and. You got to pay attention to them, but be careful, guys. Don't fall into the siren trap and that temptation of getting kind of lured into, hey, this works, and this is cool, and this worked over here, it's going to work over here. Don't play that game. And Marquart is a good warning against that. All right, any other comments or discussion or pushback on this? This is exceedingly relevant, guys, because you will absolutely encounter this within your first couple years of ministry, guaranteed. You're going to get this. And you're going to get a lot of well-meaning, unthinking lay people are going to say, you know, Pastor, I heard about this church, and it's going really well, and they've got a contemporary service, so I think we need to get one too. And they're just unthinkingly taking stuff, hey, it worked here, it's going to work here, boom, done. And no one's ever stopping to say, wait a minute, should we be doing this? Why? What? Are we capable of it? What's the advantage? Is this a good thing? No one's asking that stuff. They're just looking for quick answers, which is what everybody's always doing. So you've got to be a lot smarter than this and get on top of stuff and not fall into the trap of, hey, if it works, we're going to do it. Okay, nobody wants to talk about it anymore. All right, it's fine. You know, you don't have to. You know, you can just disagree with me silently. That's fine. All right. Yeah, Nicholas.
I'm wondering, because in Germany we are very, very afraid of this principle.
Oh, good for you.
But we have.
That's because you're not American.
But we sometimes go into the trap that we reject everything what is social, logical or psychological. And I think that is a trap too.
No, I agree.
Because then it's only a kind of spiritual, divine thing.
No, I know, I agree.
Not anymore a human thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, good preaching should be a mix of good, hardcore spiritual reality and theological truth, but also needs to be engaging. And that's just good rhetoric. I mean, and here we can appeal to our fathers, our Lutheran fathers. Melanchthon was a master in, what was he the prof of? Rhetoric. He was a theologian second. He was a philosopher and rhetorician first. And he was a good rhetorician. And so what's the whole key of rhetoric? To be persuasive. And if you're going to be persuasive, you got to know things about sociology, human nature, psychology. You got to get tuned in. What do you think advertising is? It's rhetoric. It's being persuasive. And so is a good sermon full of rhetoric? Yeah. Am I intentionally trying to manipulate people into believing certain things? Yes. You can call it manipulation because, whoa, no, we don't manipulate. Of course we do. I'm trying to be persuasive. What do you think I'm trying to do in here day after day? I want to shape you into thinking like I do. And I'll do whatever I can to make you believe. Of course I will. And you can call it what you want. Brainwashing, I'm all over it, man. I'm all over it. Indoctrination, you bet. Own it. I own that one. Because that's what we're here for. I'm here to indoctrinate little kids and indoctrinate adults. I'm to shape them into the reality. Because if it's God's truth, it's God's truth. Isn't that the goal? And so that's what rhetoric is all about. And good rhetoric pays attention to stuff. So you don't just get up in the pulpit and read a text that's doctrinally accurate, boring as heck. I love Rousseau, Rev. Rousseau's favorite quote I love his is that heresy has slain its thousands and boredom its tens of thousands. And, he's right. Does he still use that one?
Well, yeah, probably.
Yeah, that's my faves. He's spot on with that. And that's right. So I would agree with that, Nicholas. That's what I'm saying. There's this interface here. Yeah, James.
Yeah. So one of the things that you struggle with is when your congregation wants those kind of things.
Yeah.
I've always thought that the way to approach that is, well, why do you want those things?
Yeah.
And then what's your objective? And if the answer to me comes back, we want to grow our church. That's not the right answer. But if the answer is it's another way to, maybe it's another way to proclaim that gospel. It's another way to reach people where they are.
Well, see, even there you have to be careful. To me, the right answer is we want to be faithful in this place and to proclaim the gospel as meaningfully and as compellingly as we possibly can. That's what we want to do. And if that's the case we're trying to make, okay, let's talk about that. But if it's just to get your numbers up or to be relevant or to be cool like the church down the road, because we want to matter, we want to matter too. And there is so much competition between congregations out there in the parish. You guys already know this. And that drives so much of what people do. And it's not a question of, are we trying to be faithful here in this place? That's got to be the issue. But it takes a long time to get people to kind of recognize that and get on board with that. All right, yeah, Peter.
What would be your critique of someone who wants to appeal to an emotional experience? Maybe not relative to another congregation, but just...
Oh, you mean as far as why they want a contemporary service? Because they like the emotions? I'd say emotions are fine, but we don't live for that, I get kind of emotional when I sing For All the Saints. Yeah, it is. Yeah. A couple verses in there just blow me away now. You have a parent die, it kind of just changes the whole thing. So anyway, it's good stuff. So, emotions are fine, but we don't live on our emotions. And you just try to teach them about not to be a schwärmerei then at that point. So, all right, let's go to page 126. This is an interesting footnote. This is footnote buried at the bottom of the page. It starts on page 125. It's footnote 19. And this is where Walter's being quoted properly, and where he quotes Luther talking about why we need pastors, because pastors are really important because they actually deliver the gospel really significantly. But then we have the second paragraph on page 126, and this is that, remember I told you back when we did Walter, Kirk, and Amt, and I said this is the one section of Walter that I really struggle with, where he said that the AC5 is obviously talking about the ministry in the abstract and not the concrete. Remember that? And I said, I think Walter's off track on this. All right, well, here's Marquart addressing it. And he addresses it wisely in a footnote where most people won't notice. Now, the reason this is also interesting is this footnote was pulled out exactly as it is here, taken out and plopped into the new Harrison edition of Kirk and Amt. And this is how Harrison handles that same passage in Walther that I have trouble with. He just quotes Marquart and then dodges it that way, and lets Marquart speak for himself. And what you have going here then is pretty clearly something's fishy with Walther here, but nobody wants to say it that way. But I just did, all right? And I really think that's the case. There's something fishy going on, and everybody kind of knows it, but you don't want to blame that on Walther, for crying out loud, and yet that's kind of what's happening here. So here's what Marquart says. Walther himself, however, may have overinterpreted L. Hartmann, who wrote Church and Ministry, and this is in his Church and Ministry, page 178. Remember, that was the page I called your attention to in Kirk and Amt, whose citation, Hartmann's citation, says not that there is an abstract office and then also a concrete office, but rather that one and the same office may be considered abstractly in respect of the office and estate, the stand, the status, itself as an AC5, or concretely in respect of the persons who function in this sacred office as an AC14, the Rite Vocatus. There is only one divinely instituted office, which is ordinarily, and this is part of the divine institution, exercised by the divinely called incumbents of that office, but which may in emergencies be exercised to the extent necessary by anyone. I would have to say Marquart is right. Now, I haven't read Hartmann. I'll have to admit that. I'm not that interested. I haven't dug up Hartmann and read him. But I think Marquart is exactly right that this is kind of what's going on here in the Augsburg Confession. And to say that the AC5 is really just talking about abstract priesthood of the believers is patently not what's going on in AC5. And everybody knows it, but nobody can quite say it that bluntly because of what Walther said. And here's Marquart trying to say maybe Walther just overdid it a little bit. Maybe. And then we'll just leave that one alone, everybody. Just kind of come to your own conclusions. So I'm just encouraging you to do the same thing, okay? Someday maybe we'll deal with this in a convention, but not in my lifetime, I doubt. All right. Good. That's enough on that. So we move on forward. And now he's talking about the difference between apostolic and all the other offices. And he's basically saying you're all in the same office and you're all doing apostolic stuff. And that's what's cool here. And let's not get hung up on this one. On page 131, he starts getting into this discussion about prophets versus pastors. And this one kind of cuts two ways. And this one gets a little interesting. Because here you start getting into the scriptural use of this term prophetes. And you have, and this gets really interesting, because on one hand we can make the case, and I think this is legit, to say that the prophetic office is still at work today. And where is it at work today? Well, in the pastoral office. Because you have learned this in your exegetical classes. Primarily, what did prophets do? They spoke for God. And remember, you often we be told, at least I was told, they didn't spend so much of their time foretelling as simply forthtelling. All right? So in other words, prophets weren't busy seeing the future all the time. We always think, oh, he's a prophet, he sees the future. No, most of what's in the prophets is simply telling God's word. And that's what you as a pastor do. You get up in the pulpit, and anytime you are speaking from God to the people, you are in the prophetic office. I think that's legit. I think that's true. I think that's on the right track. Now, the reason it gets a little fuzzy is because St. Paul can talk about no woman should prophesy with her head uncovered. Not, whoa! Prophesy? What's going down now? And now this starts to create all kinds of a muddle, because we just tied pastors and prophets kind of together. The pastors are doing that prophetic stuff today. And so now, if you got, women should not prophesy with their head uncovered, there you have it. Women's ordination. She's prophesying. Prophets are pastors. Done. And that's why Marquart on this page is actually trying to pull some space here a little bit and make some distinction. And I think this is fair. I would argue that primarily in the New Testament, prophecy is actually pretty broad. So anybody who is speaking for God and declaring God's truth is doing prophetic work. And so your mother-in-law sits you down and says, son, you need to do this. Is she in the prophetic office of God? Yeah, that's a prophetic action. That's legit. Or you're in a small group Bible study and people are taking turns sharing some insights on the text, and a woman speaks up and says, this text I believe means this, and I really see how this plays out in my life this way. And people are in the group saying, cool, yeah, you're on track. So is she in the prophetic office at that point? I think so. And I think that's exactly what Paul's talking about when he says no woman should prophesy with her head uncovered. He's just talking about propriety within the church setting, and can women speak in church and share insights into God's truth? Yes. Does that make them pastors? No. And that's the criteria here again. So that's why Marquart's trying to make a distinction here. He would say that pastors are part of that one office, but not every prophet necessarily is. That's kind of what he's doing here, okay? So I think he's on the right track here, and he's talking about how these are just very fluid terms, so we just keep that in mind. Then we get into page 132 and 133, and I don't want to spend too long on this either, but this still pops up from time to time. When I was a young pastor, and even this carried over in some congregations for a long time, spiritual gift inventories were all the rage. How many of you have ever done a spiritual gift inventory? Yeah, see, they're still around. And so you have like 140 questions, and I sometimes think about being shot with arrows for Christ. Yes. You know what I mean, right? And so, and you know how these always go. Every 10th question kind of looks like the 10th question, because they're going to categorize you, and you go back through and add it all up and tally it up, and you get all done, and you find out these are my spiritual gifts. And it's a little scary when you find out you have the spiritual gift of martyrdom. Oh no! So these things were all the rage when I was a young pastor. Everybody was doing spiritual gifts inventories and figuring out their spiritual gifts. So what's Marquart think of spiritual gift inventories? Yeah, he's less than excited. Less than excited. Now, Marquart, he's at his best here. He really is. It's just one of my favorite parts of this whole book is how he talks about this. This is the very, very bottom of page 132. Last two sentences. All schemes are self-condemned to present the gifts as if they were spiritual enzymes needed to activate the otherwise inert word and sacraments. And it is simply absurd to take ha pruestaminus, which basically means being able to steer a ship, as a gift of ruling in the sense of an inclination and ability in search of fulfillment. That is good English. It's basically saying, hey, I've got the gift of ruling. Come follow me, dude. Come on. You do not need this in the parish. Trust me on this. What you don't want is a person coming and saying, I've got the gift of leadership, Pastor. Okay. Not on my watch. But anyway, clearly what Paul has in mind is that who has been assigned the responsibility of leading or presiding, possibly the Eucharist, should do so with proper diligence, not that someone who enjoys ruling should diligently look for prospective followers and then press his services upon them. Exactly. Now, this is just about one side of this downside of this kind of spiritual gifts inventories. I'll say something nice first about them. For somebody who has no clue about what their gifts might be or what they might do in service to the church or what it actually means to be Christian, they can be very helpful tools on the way towards self-discovery. Like, oh, I guess maybe I am kind of inclined to hospitality, or I guess I am inclined to speaking God's truth, or maybe that's true. That's fine. The downside is people start making rules about these things. I can remember being taught that everybody has at least one spiritual gift, and you have a directing spiritual gift, and you have supporting spiritual gifts, and you have to discern that spiritual gift. Now, this gets problematic on several levels. And the first area of attack I'll give you is this starts to sound a whole lot like looking for your passion. And I have become increasingly hateful of that idea of passion, and I still hear this in churches. We want you to figure out your passion and serve with your passion. What's this? What is this? Who cares what your passion is? I don't get to do what I feel like. I need to do what I need to do. And so much better than doing your passion is simply, what vocation has God given you? Maybe you should do that. And maybe you should learn to appreciate that and do it with some zeal and find some joy in that. What's this passion thing? We elevate our self-indulgent feelings so much. And what's passion? Nothing but a feeling. Think about the word itself, okay? It's to suffer. And we all suffer with your passions. So, passion sounds a little bit like found my spiritual gift. Now, the reason this gets problematic is because you start having all these individuals running around trying to assert their spiritual gift or their passion, trying to figure out where to slot it in. Instead of the church saying, hey, we are a community. Here's what we're doing here. This is what we're doing. You need to come on board and be part of it. We need you here. Come on and do this. Okay. I don't have the gift of washing dishes, but I guess I'll do it anyway. And this is important to realize that, you see, the church has a claim on us which is bigger than my individuality. And the spiritual gifts inventory start to lose that. It becomes all about individual fulfillment. The church is not interested in fulfilling individuals. We're not in the business of soul fulfillment. The church is in the business of teaching God's truth and shaping people into the story of Christ. Think about it. We're going to talk more about this as time goes along here, but we get the arrows turned around all the time. We think the church is here to service people's felt needs and help them become fulfilled, complete individuals, autonomous, out there able to have complete, nice, happy lives. You've tried sex, drugs, rock and roll, now try Jesus. He's going to give you all you need. Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. The church is saying, we're God's reality. This is the chosen community. This is where truth is going on. You live outside of this, you're going to hell. Your life is futile. Here, everything clicks. Come on and be part of this. We'll show you what it means to be human. We'll teach you how to live. We'll show you what it means to be rightly related to God and creatures. Come on and be part of us. And so the people are invited in, and they are shaped by the church instead of the church being shaped by them. See, this is also why taking surveys in the church to find out what people think is pointless. Who cares what they think? Oh, you guys are just really on board today. Just right. Oh, yeah, you're right. No, but think how counterintuitive this is. We're always worried about what everybody thinks. But who cares what they think? Their thoughts don't matter. What matters is what the church tells you, what God gives you. Conform to that. Isn't this awesome? The church is a Christocracy. Christ is Lord. Darn it. Yeah, Stephen.
It seems like there's an opportunity to balance that a little bit too.
Oh, Steve, don't balance me today. I don't feel like being balanced. Yeah, fine. You can balance it if you want to. You take everything I say with a grain of salt, but not much. All right. Now, the other problem with spiritual gifts inventories is this. You end up, I got two more problems. Number two problem is this. You end up having these people who would say, well, Pastor, I don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism, and only 10% of the congregation does, and so I'm not really responsible for sharing my faith. Seriously? That's a scriptural position? Isn't every Christian obligated to open his stupid mouth and talk about Jesus? Isn't he? Tell me who gets a free pass on that. But then when you have the spiritual gift inventory, oh, too bad. Don't have the gift of evangelism. Whew, guess I don't have to do that. I'll let you evangelists take care of that because you're better at it than I am. This is garbage. But this has been going on in the church for way too long. And people just take, the easy way out. Oh, I have the gift of hospitality. And you'll find out, lo and behold, about 80% of people take the survey. I've got the gift of hospitality. I like serving. There. How easy is that? Give me a break. And so I think that's a big problem. It ends up fueling wrong ideas. And the final issue I have, and this is more of a theological issue, is simply the spiritual gift inventories are always based on, the spiritual gifts from the Bible. But every single time there's a spiritual gift list in the Scripture, it's different. It's different. It's never the same twice. Which should make us say, maybe this is kind of a malleable thing. Maybe it's not quite set in stone. Maybe it shifts and moves around through time. And maybe there is such a thing as a spiritual gift of computer programming. Why not? Maybe there is a spiritual gift of music, even though that's not on the list. You see, it's really silly to say, no, it's only that stuff. Because then what if somebody has a natural born talent? Oh, I'm sorry, that's not a spiritual gift. You got to figure out what your spiritual gift is, because you only got that since you were baptized. Your natural born talents don't count. This is absurd. This is just nuts. Far better to say, you have gifts that are to be used in service of the church. You are a member of the body of Christ. Come and use your gifts. And here's the balance that Steve is looking for, maybe, at least the one I want to give. And the cool thing is that when an individual becomes part of that body of Christ and is incorporated into that community, guess what? His life clicks. And he realizes that when his story is in line with God's story, he finds the very fulfillment he was looking for all along. Not in pursuing himself, but in simply being conformed to Christ. This is where it works. It's like that Systematics 1, Adam in the Groove from Bonhoeffer. And when Adam is in the groove, everything clicks because he's right where he was created to be. And when you are in the groove of the church, doing your vocation, it's like being at home. Man, it all just, boom, there it is. And that's the coolest thing of all. And so the actual freedom and fulfillment that people are desiring does not come from self-pursuits or doing the search for your soulmate or your ideal job. It comes when you yield yourself to God's reality, conform to what He gives you, and you find yourself saying, this is where I always belonged. How cool is this? Is that making sense? Is that what you're looking for, Steve?
That's better than what I was looking for.
All right. Oh! Man, it's just really coming from the front today. All right. So page 135, this is a nice kind of sum up here. We sum up in language, top of the page. Closely is patterned after that of the great Wisconsin Synod dogmatician A. Haneke. The public ministry of word and sacraments is the divinely willed ordinary form and continuation of the one gospel ministry by God in the extraordinary form of the apostolate. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's good. All right, he gets into discussion about Peter and Peter's confession and the rock. And of course, Lutheran confessions have always said that the confession of Peter is the rock. What does Marquart hint at? What does he think the rock should actually be understood as? Christ himself. And I'm kind of sympathetic to that. I think Jesus always kind of trumps everything else. And so I'm kind of cool with that. But really, what's the difference between Christ and the confession of Christ? We're looking at the same thing. It's Christ, and he becomes the rock. So I'm kind of on board with that. I like that. All right. Now, within the office, then, we've already hit on this. Marquart does it again. What ranks are there within the one office? There are none. Any distinction among the office holders is purely a human arrangement, and it has no ultimate bearing in the theology involved and the spirituality involved. So that means if you are an assistant pastor, you are every bit as much pastor as the senior pastor. Every bit. And we've made that clear, and we've talked a little bit how that works out. I think that's exactly what he's getting at here, and he's right on this. So I'm totally on board with that. All right. Good. Yes.
According to that, how do you feel about Harrison's idea of bringing all church discipline under himself?
I don't know if he has that idea. I've not read that or aware of that. So I don't know if I guess I'm not sure what that would mean or what he would have in mind or what you have in mind saying that. So far as should all church discipline be centered underneath one individual, no. But I don't think he would be advocating that. I don't think he's figuring that if there's a guy at St. Peter's Lutheran Church who's divorcing his wife for unscriptural reasons, he wants to be involved. I don't think that's...
I was hearing that exact thing.
Wow. I would doubt that would be the extent. I would suspect there would be a little better theology going on than that. So, anyway, I guess that would be probably the church not functioning very well as a church, I guess, if we're starting to do that. So I don't know enough about it to speak any more than that. I haven't read anything more. All right. Good. Page 140. We're getting close to the end of this chapter and we can get into the fun stuff. All right. He doesn't talk a lot about this, but we're going to have a class period devoted to this coming up on the whole left-right interface, the temporal, spiritual realm interface. And Marquart makes a passing comment here about this. This is the first full paragraph on 140. Needless to say, our modern world with its massive miseries offers ample opportunity for the exercise of love's healing diakonia. Agreed. The relief of human wretchedness today calls for an inventive resourcefulness. Okay? But congregations, acting singly or together with others, need to take care. So in other words, does he think that we should be caring for the world and its miseries around us? Yeah. And this is interesting because Marquart actually put his money where his mouth was. He was, and people don't maybe know this, but he was very involved in the pro-life movement and quite involved in ecumenical things even, rubbing elbows with Baptists, Catholics, all kinds of people in the pro-life movement, and was very involved in that. And so he knows what he's talking about. So that's what he's kind of getting at. But then he makes his caution. Congregations acting singly or together with others need to take care that the diaconic labors truly proceed from the altar and lead to the altar, so that they are not perceived with either within or without simply as ecclesiastical extensions of the welfare bureaucracy. The churchly institutions of William Leahy can be our shining examples here. I got a problem with that, frankly. I think he's confusing his left-right distinction a little bit, because I'm going to make the case that if we really understand Luther correctly with the spiritual and the temporal realm working, doing the right things, when the church, even as church, is out serving in the world, we're simply serving the world. And we're meeting the needs of the world. And our goal should not be at that point to try to figure out how it brings people back to the altar, per se. Our goal at that point is simply to alleviate the need. So if you have a person who's starving to death and he needs to be fed, you're not feeding him and saying, okay, now you have to come to church, or you're not feeding him so that someday he can come to the church and hear the gospel. You're feeding him because he's starving to death and he needs food, period. And that's the left-hand temporal thing. Now the spiritual needs are also there, and you're concerned about those. That's a reality. But when we're doing left-hand stuff, it should just be left-hand stuff. And I'll make my case for this more strongly, but I don't think Marquart's on board with me there on that. So I would just point out that slight nuanced difference, but I think it has implications. For example, if you in your ministry someday get the youth group together and say, let's go out and serve the neighborhood, and we're going to go out and shovel a bunch of snow walks because everybody got snowed in and all these great old people are stuck in their houses. So we're going to go out and shovel walks. So off we go. So do you go out and shovel walks, and as you do it, you say, hi, old little old lady, we're here because we love Jesus and we're shoveling our walk for Jesus. And hope you'll come to church someday. I would say, no, you don't do that. You knock on the door. You don't even knock on the door. You just shovel the walk and leave. And if she says, who are you, kind child? You just say, I'm just a kid who saw your walk needed to be shoveled. Hope you enjoy your clear walk. Bye. See, you're not advertising. You're not doing it for ulterior motives. Why are you serving her? She's got a need. Why are you doing it? Because she needs to be taken care of. Just take care of her. It's just that simple. So I'm not real fond of when youth groups put on all their Jesus t-shirts and go out and serve the community. I think they're kind of missing the point. All right. I know all these crazy ideas. Like, what? Just think about it. Just think about it. All right. And then we get into the problem, though, of this whole diaconia. And then we get into the issue of, okay, so what about these deacons? Now, what is the big problem here? What's the rub we've got in this whole discussion about deacons and what becomes the driving discussion? And it also starts percolating up in our purple document here. What's the problem with deacons? Yes?
Is that the idea that, like Stephen, was he a minister, like a minister of the word, or was he a table server?
Exactly. This becomes the problem. So we have these 7 deacons that show up in the book of Acts, right? And why were they appointed?
They needed help.
Because the apostles were getting worn out, running around waiting on tables and trying to figure out who's going to get fed the right amount of food. And see, this is the problem when you start living like communists, but we won't go into that. I read somewhere, this is a little sidebar worth saying something about. We often talk about, the first century church, the Acts chapter 2 church, living with everything in common, the first communists, right? You've heard that, right? So, that's how it should be. Well, how come nobody lives that way anymore? And why didn't Paul keep on talking that way to the Corinthians or the Galatians? And it's been speculated that one of the reasons why is it didn't work. And they just gave up on it because it was ineffective. It just didn't work. And in fact, I even read one commentator who suggested maybe the famine in the mother church in Jerusalem was being precipitated by the fact that everybody sold their farms and nobody had anything left. And they sold everything and gave it away. Now they have nothing left. So now the Gentiles have to take care of them. But, dude, that's a cool thought. I hadn't, maybe. So let's not get too carried away, celebrating their communism of the first century. It probably fell flat. That's why I didn't keep on doing it. So anyway, we have the deacons who are appointed to wait on tables so the apostles can be free to do what they need to do. Right? Now, all is good here. So we got apostles who are the predicant, preach, bring God's word, do the word and sacrament, and now we're going to have deacons. We're going to take care of the food distribution. Cool. Everything's great. Now, everything will be fine here. But where's the problem? The problem is two dudes, Stephen and Philip. Because Stephen ends up going before the Sanhedrin, and what's he do when he gets there? He preaches a sermon. It's even called that. And we get Philip running off with the Ethiopian eunuch, and what's he do? He baptizes him. And then he goes off to another place and he preaches and brings people to faith. Wait a minute, that looks like predictum stuff. So now we got a problem. And so this has been a problem for interpretation down through the years. People have speculated. Some people say, well, in fact, the deacons were always a subset of the office. And Rome functions that way today. This is the lowest of the ordained offices, but it's in the office. That's how they operate. Or the other move is to say, well, no. Deacons are deacons. They just do table stuff. But what happened was the deacons later on were ordained into the full office. We just weren't told about it. Okay? Now, you have enough available to you now to come up with a better answer. So what's the better answer? MDiv fourth-year students, you should be able to handle this. What's a better answer? Yes, Andy?
That Philip and Stephen were operating in their vocations, and when they're part of the priesthood, so when they came across someone who needed to hear the word, they preached.
Bingo. Exactly right. They're just doing their propria. And so, do they as priests have the right to be able to proclaim the gospel? Do they as priests have the right and the obligation to do a baptism? Yes, yes. So the deacons are just doing their vocation. They don't need to be in the office to do what they do. And this is all cool. There's no problem here at all. It's like, nothing here to see. Move along, nothing here to see. There's no big deal. There's no crisis here with Philip doing his thing and Stephen doing his thing. They're just doing their vocation. So this is exactly right. So I think this is a much better way of looking at this. And then this now leads us, though, into the final treatment of this chapter, and this becomes the driving concern of the CTCR document, which is now we get into this question of the auxiliary offices. All right. And so we're on page 141. I'm at the top of the page. Be that as it may, what is clear is that the church's diaconic sharing at tables is not as such the diakonia tu lagu, the ministry of the word. Thank you for that. From which it is expressly distinguished. The church, therefore, may ask one of its public ministers of the word to attend also to tables, but a person commissioned only for table diaconia does not thereby become a public minister of the gospel. In principle, this applies to all auxiliary offices, but in practice, some of these offices presuppose that the incumbent is already in the public ministry while others do not. And I think this is exactly right. So in other words, a guy who is in the office might be asked to wait on tables, but it doesn't mean then, conversely, that every table waiter is in the office. There's a one-way flow here, not the other way, and this is exactly right. So I think this is on track. This is good. All right, so now he says he's going to apply this to all these auxiliary offices, and then this opens up the whole question about auxiliary offices. So let's now shift over to our CTCR document and talk about auxiliary offices. So we're picking this up on page 16, if I remember right, is where I had you start. Other offices in the church, okay? Now, you read through the CTCR document, and you read the 8 or so pages I had you read about auxiliary offices. What's your response to that? What are you thinking as you're reading this? What is your evaluation? James.
I got the auxiliary offices are there. They support the office of the ministry, of the pastoral ministry.
Okay. They are supportive of the office.
Kind of like those deacons. Hey, I've got to do all this stuff, but I need to focus on preaching sacraments.
Right.
So you take care of all this other stuff.
So it seems like the deacons were the original auxiliary office. So these are people who are doing service to the church. They are supportive of the pastoral office, but they're not in the office, but they are in a support role, which means auxiliary. Because auxiliary technically means help. Okay? Now the document also points out, which I think is probably true, auxiliary is probably not the best word. I always think about little ladies sewing quilts, and I just can't get past that. The ladies help auxiliary. So it just means the service kind of a thing. All right. So that's there. What else did you think about the CTCR document? Describing everything you already know, right? Kind of sounds familiar. It's what you learned. If you're a CUS graduate, this is what you were taught, right, at CUS. And if you're any former DCEs in here? Or DCEs who are not former? Got close? Oh, you guys never quite finished. It's close. You guys can help verify some of my theories then as we go forward here. All right. Yeah. So you were kind of taught what's here, okay? Because this is the official line. So let's take a look at a couple things in here. Page 17 to start with then. Reading on the middle of the page, we are quoting here C.F.W. Walther. C.F. Walther is instructive. This is smack in the middle of the page, the one full paragraph. He wrote, "The highest office is the ministry of preaching, with which all other offices are simultaneously conferred. Therefore, every other public office in the church is merely a part of the office of the ministry or an auxiliary office which is attached to the ministry of preaching." All right, so how many offices are there? Well, we said one, and does Walter seem to support that? Kind of yes and no. Yeah, he's saying they're all part of the highest office, and all the rest of the offices are simultaneously conferred, but then he does talk about the other offices. And so we're already starting to get a little murky here. Okay, getting just a little bit murky. Then we have footnote 5 on that same page. Serving in the distribution of food did not in and of itself entitle Stephen, for instance, to preach or teach publicly. Since he clearly did so, our great theologians of the past, like Chemnitz and Gerhard, surmised either that the 7 of Acts 6 were selected from among ministers of the word to begin with, or that some were subsequently ordained. And I think both of those are inadequate explanations. And so I'm disagreeing with Chemnitz and Gerhard, but I think you guys have a better answer. All right, so I'm done with that. Now we're starting, I want to move forward then. So now we have established the idea. There is then the one office, the predicant, the preaching office, what we would today call the pastoral office. But then the idea we operate with today is underneath the pastoral offices are all these auxiliary offices. So we can have pastor, and that is going to be the office of the holy ministry, but then we might have a DCE. Or maybe we have a minister of music, okay? And we'll call him a minister because that makes it better. And maybe we have a parish nurse, okay? And this is not just a nurse, this is a parish nurse who's doing a ministry in the church, right? Okay? Or maybe we would have, maybe we need to have a minister of facilities because someone needs to take care of the stuff, all right? And so maybe we even have to have a ministry of sanitation, because we need to have somebody to clean up. And so we have a janitor. But no, it's not a janitor. It's a ministry. It's a ministry, darn it, because you're doing it at church. You're not just a janitor. You're doing a ministry. Okay? So we have a minister of janitation. Okay? All right. And so we're going to have everything in place. And so all of these are auxiliaries. Oh, I forgot one of the most important ones. A teacher. And by teacher, of course, we're not meaning pastor. We're meaning teacher, what everybody knows it means, which would be a day school teacher, okay? And so we'll go with a day school teacher. And so we would say every one of these is really auxiliary to the pastoral office because every one of these is simply fulfilling some aspect of the pastoral office. And they're all auxiliary to it. So there's really one office, but they're all sharing in it. That's LCMS way of thinking today, right? And in fact, you're often told at a CUS school that if you're in a program for a DCE or a music ministry or a teacher, or they also have things called parish administrators or director of family life, any of those in here? No? Okay, well, so that's what you're working at? Yeah, okay, you guys are on it here. All right. Director of family life, whatever. And so we have all of these, and often what gets told to these young aspiring students is, now you realize you are doing ministry. This is ministry every bit as much as the ministry of a pastor. And it is divine, holy ministry. And don't let any pastor tell you otherwise. Don't let any pastor make you feel inferior. Don't let any pastor put you down for being just a DC. You're not just anything. You are a minister in the church. Heard that speech?
It was, for us, it was like leading from the second chair is what we were like.
Yeah, and you're leading. Yeah, okay, all right. Second chair is not bad. No, it's ministry. Now, this has been this position all along. This position that is regnant in the LCMS goes back to Walther. And historically, the scoop is, now I have not done a ton of reading this, I've had some conversations with some historians, that Walther had a situation where he was short on pastors, especially in some of these far-flung areas. And so he had the idea of we will let some superintendents, who in his day were all men who had been trained and got some theology to actually do some Word and Sacrament ministry. And so he made them not necessarily Word and Sacrament, but he put them as an auxiliary to the pastoral office because he wanted them to be a little bit higher status. So he was the one who kind of came up with this. I'm less than thrilled with this, frankly. I'll just kind of cut to the chase here and put all my cards on the table. I think some of this auxiliary office talk has gotten kind of bizarre because we start getting this list, and I know I'm being a little bit facetious down here, but if we're going to be consistent, we actually call DCEs, don't we? They're called into an office, and we call directors of family life, and we call teachers. And we sometimes call music ministers, but they get a little more vague. Sometimes we just contract them. Parish nurses, do they get called? I haven't heard of it, but it's possible. Ministry of facilities, should we call a guy to make sure the roof's not leaking? What about the janitor? Should we call the janitor and install him in a special service during the service and make sure that he's going to be submissive to the Book of Concord?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is what we do. Every time we call one of these and install them, one of the questions they get asked is, will you follow the Book of Concord in all of your teaching? And they say, yes. And they're embarrassed because they don't even know what they're talking about sometimes. You've heard the stories. They haven't even cracked the Book of Concord, let alone read it. And yet I just subscribed because I need my job. And we're in a weird situation. Now, here's what I want to press this on a little bit. So the CTCR document says things like this, page 18. I'm about 6 lines from the top of the page. The teaching of the faith to the children and youth of the flock is a major duty of the pastoral office. I would agree, formation in the faith. To refer to it as the teaching ministry is less awkward and understandable to the church. All right. So now he's talking about, a teaching ministry, and now we just moved from being teacher as pastor, being teacher as a day school teacher. And then we have all the reasons why this is a good idea. So we're now on the same page. By using the term teaching ministry, we are indicating the special nature of the auxiliary office of teacher in our church. One who is in the teaching ministry meets the following qualifications. And away we go with all the qualifications. About halfway down the list, we are told, this teacher does work that is specifically spiritual in nature. Although she may teach some secular subject, the philosophy of Lutheran education includes the demand that the faith of the church be evident in all activities of the school. Law and gospel, sin and grace are operative in the curriculum and methodology of a Lutheran school. And we're told that this teacher should go to all synodical events, go to all synodical conventions, subscribe to the confessions, and it's a lifelong calling because they have a divine call from God because they're in the office. Even though it's not the office, they're in an office, but it's tied to the office. And if it's getting a little confusing, it is to me too. Now the problem I have is this. Both of my wife and my two daughters were all trained LCMS parochial school teachers, and they all taught for a while. And so when my daughter was teaching first graders, was she shaping those kids in the faith? Sure. Okay, sure. But what was she spending most of her day teaching them? Phonics, rudimentary geography, basic science, how to behave, how not to hit their friends. She spent her day basically managing a classroom, and was she teaching them left-hand things or right-hand things? Left-hand things. Most of the day was all about basic, how to be a citizen in the world today, how to function. And there was some religion given, and sure, if a kid was messing around, she could take him out in the hall and confront them with the law of God and give them the gospel and they repent and deal with things in a very gospel way. Pretty cool. But was she being an extension of the pastoral office in her teaching vocation? I don't think so. Marquart makes this case. Page 142, first full paragraph. School teachers in our modern sense appear in the Latin of the Small Catechism as the pedagogues, who are to teach their boys, the chief parts. The German speaks instead of house fathers teaching their households. Although Luther can occasionally list schoolmasters with sacristans among the persons comprising the ecclesiastical order, the large catechism derives the schoolmaster's office from that of the father, not from the ministry of the word. This is huge, people. And I think this is exactly right. The school teacher who's teaching in a parochial day school, a Lutheran day school, and spending their day teaching about vocab and phonics or upper levels, literature, are they an extension of the pastoral office or are they an extension of the parents? They're really an extension of the parents. This is what they're doing. Now, I'm going to make the case, I'm going to be even just more upfront about this. I would say there's really nothing of the pastoral office at all at what my daughter used to do when she was teaching her first graders. she would teach religion, and she did it very well. She had an MA from here, so she knew theology better than most. Probably better than some pastors, frankly. And so she knew her theology very well and did a nice job teaching it. But she had no illusions. She was not doing anything pastoral. She was teaching these kids and forming them into the faith, which is a pretty cool thing. But she's doing that. Why? Because that's her vocation. And here's where I want to go with this. I think we are making a mistake by trying to shove these offices underneath the pastoral office and try to somehow elevate them. And this is what the CTCR document talks about, how it seems more spiritual if they're part of the office. I think that's garbage. I would say what they're doing is they're doing the vocation that they have been given by God, that the church sees as important, and they should be honored for doing their vocation for the sake of the church. To shove them under the pastoral office actually diminishes them. It makes them look like you're an appendage to the thing that really matters. And it's no wonder that a lot of these offices feel like second-class citizens and feel like, I'm not a pastor, but I'm just part of his office and I have a derived call. No. These are people who are simply doing their vocation for the sake of the church, and this is good and right and worthy, and the church should honor that and respect that and pay accordingly and show their respect and their honor of this. And so if somebody is working for the church should be honoring that work because this is important. Does that put them in the office? No. They're not being absolution man. So if my daughter needs to forgive a child, can she in her vocation? Of course. That's her proprium. Right? I mean, this is exactly consistent with everything we've been getting. So she just does her job as a teacher and brings the gospel to them as much as she can. But see, now we're going to realize, well, maybe there's not that much difference between a parochial school teacher and a public school teacher. Just a parochial school teacher gets a whole lot more freedom. But they're both doing their vocation and in their proprium, trying the best they can to deliver God's word as much as they possibly can. Exactly. And if the school, or if the church says, we want a school because we want to make sure our kids are getting thoroughly indoctrinated in God's thinking, awesome. Do we need to hire good people to do this? Yes. Are they somehow part of the auxiliary office or the pastoral office? No. They're just doing their vocation for the sake of the church very well. Thank you for that. That's awesome. And you see, this, I think, begins a whole shift in the way we think about these things. So, in my ideal LCMS world, we would call only pastors. Only pastors. And teachers and DCEs would be hired or contracted by the church as needed and given a sacred responsibility, paid accordingly, and honored for the work they're doing for the sake of the church. Now, things can get a little fuzzy in here because some DCEs, frankly, start operating really like assistant pastors. And if they start doing substantial word and sacrament formation kind of stuff, then really what's going on here? They're really coming into the office, and what's the next move we should make? Ordain them into the office and either run them through the SMP or find some other way to deal with this. But we need to be a little more clear on what you're actually doing. And some churches, frankly, get a DCE because it's a cheap way to get some guy doing stuff cheaper than getting a pastor, which is a ripoff, and it's a shame. It's wrong. Part of the motivation, again, and I've touched on this before, and I want to be honest about this, part of what drives some of this, frankly, is the fact that as soon as you are ordained or in the ministry, you're now, by IRS rules, self-employed. And as soon as you're self-employed, that means your employer doesn't have to pay his share of your Social Security tax or your FICA. And so FICA is now at 15%. So if you're self-employed, you pay all 15%. If you're working for somebody else, you pay 7.5%, they pay 7.5%. And so a congregation comes out ahead, having somebody called rather than contracted, which is often the motivation that churches have for getting their teachers called instead of merely contracted. It's a dirty little secret nobody likes to talk about, but it's true.
Yeah, the school that my wife works for, they're in the process of getting all of their contracted teachers colloquized.
Yep.
And they won't say why, but
yeah.
That when you said that the other day, I came home and I said that to Emma, and she's like, "Well, that makes sense." They're sick of paying that 7.5%.
Yeah. Yeah, James. Now there are theological reasons for doing it too, because you want your teachers to have some theology, but how much to get being colloquized, I'm not always sure. But yeah, James.
So I agree. I think I see what you're saying about, the math teacher at, Concordia Christian Day School is not doing.
That's right. Not word and sacrament, he's not in the office.
So going back to the apostolic times,
yeah.
And the 7 were called
right.
to serve tables.
Yep.
Do we have any idea of how that?
Nope, we don't.
I mean, that would kind of be in the same boat.
It would. You see, I would say the same thing. And see, my argument would be, that's why I don't care if these guys were in the office or not. Frankly, I would say they're probably not. I think the whole point of appointing them was to free these guys to do their office work.
Right.
It's not like they're expanding the number, we're going to have 19. Or, now we're going to have 19 apostles. No. We've got 12 apostles. Now we've got something new called deacons.
We need these guys to help us out.
That's
but
right.
They're not part of the office.
No.
They're not called. They're not.
That's precisely the point.
The fact that the apostles asked them to do this, that's different than calling them.
Exactly. This is exactly my point. And so this gets back to the whole discussion for today. There's one office. Deacons aren't in it. They aren't. They're not in it. And are they important for the life of the church? Yes, but they're not in it. So apply it over here. Teacher of the day school. Is this an important, needed task in the church? Yeah. Are they in the office? No. So why do we act like they are? Good question. I don't know. Creates a whole lot of confusions. A whole lot of goofy situations. David.
Yeah, just an anecdote. My vicarage congregation had a teacher that they were trying to get for the school year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just asked the principal, how does the call process work? I wanted to learn. And he's like, yeah, well, we extend a 1-year call because we want to make sure she's good,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, but you don't do that for pastors, though, do you? I mean, right? He's like, oh, no, we don't do that that wouldn't be right, But I'm like, but it's a call. So this is actually really helpful to clear this up.
Right.
Well, teachers are different,
Well, because what you've encountered is a blurring inconsistency in the whole thing. And we're actually using terminology of teachers which really is not appropriate, but we're doing it because we think it's somehow elevating their office. And frankly, what we're trying to do, I think often, is just kind of throw a bone to these poor people who get underpaid and could make a ton more money working in the public system, but they're giving that up to work at the parochial school. And now we try to glamorize it by saying, well, you're in an office and you have a call, and that's so much more holy than just a contract teacher. But it's just a smoke and mirrors. What we should do is pay them a better salary and quit feeling guilty about it and not stop calling them.
Maybe cover that 7%.
Yeah, you would think. Nicholas.
So in Germany we have this practice that we have religious teachers in the schools which are not pastors. So I'm wondering if they should be called or not.
Well, see, it depends on what they're doing, and if they are actually, involved in the teaching of the faith, informing people in the faith, and that's their explicit work, then they're getting close.
I think they should do it, but normally they don't.
Yeah.
Because it's it is called confessional religious education, but they understand this confessional only evangelic or Catholic.
Right.
So
That's your two choices, right. And I'm with this. Now, this is not neat and clean. Things can get a little fuzzy. Like, what about a woman who's teaching at the college level? Can she teach theology at the college level? This has been a hot debate. Can a woman teach religion at COS level? And this kind of gets into this stuff because that starts looking like predictomp stuff, but is she just doing her vocation? And things can get a little messy in there. But I think the clarity begins when we start to back the whole thing up and say, okay, the office is the absolution man. He's doing word and sacrament. That's what he does. Anybody else in the church is doing their vocation for the sake of the church. Church is free to come up with any terms they want, anything they want. But let's quit baptizing this and calling this an office or an auxiliary office and start calling them. To me, that just perpetuates a whole lot of confusion and gets things, I don't think it elevates them in the least. I really think it diminishes them. Much better to say, you're doing what God has called you to do in your vocation. That's awesome. We're not going to give you a call, but we're going to honor you, pay you accordingly, celebrate you, and rejoice in the gifts you're bringing to us because we need you here helping us. And I think that's cool. Yeah.
Caleb had his hand up first.
Okay, Caleb.
How many professors at the seminary are called?
How many? If you're a prof at the SEM, you are called because you have to be an MDiv. You have to be a pastor. And so every prof, everybody on the faculty is called. Yep.
How many of the professors serve as a pastor of the church?
Serve as a pastor of the church? I don't know of anybody serving as a pastor full time. They might be helping out, but no. Okay. Because your call is here. That's kind of the point. I mean, there are several guys doing, vacancy preaching. I do that, and others do that, but not all of them. I don't know the number.
It just sounded to me that what you're saying is that only the clarification to be called is doing word and sacrament.
Right. Now that's the question then. So as a seminary professor doing word and sacrament, and my argument would be, I think I am. I would say yes, and that's not just because I help out in chapel once in a while here. I would say I'm doing it because I'm forming you guys into the faith, which is a key part of the pastoral office, is that formation of the faith and equipping you guys to be pastors. But this gets also funny too, because does that mean every guy with an MDiv who's doing something for the church is a called and ordained servant of the word? Not if I'm just pushing paper. You know, if I'm working as an administrator at the IC, you know, administrating, you know, a big financial corner of the synod, am I really a called servant to the, you know, am I doing word and sacrament ministry? I don't think so. And even the CTCR will support me on that. So I think we get funny sometimes when we start calling people. But again, the motivations are, if you're called, we save some money, so we're going to call you. Matt.
So I get the sense, as we talk about, you know, offices, word and sacrament ministry, and I think about the DCE, and like his position, like his youth guy, and he's, you know, preaching the word in essence to the kids that God has given to him.
Right.
And so it sounds like, I mean...
No, I'm saying, I agree. There are times...
Like the word is like a second class means of grace or something like that. Like pastor, well...
No. I would say it depends on kind of what the DCE's job description is and what that congregation expects of him. And if they expect him to start doing a whole lot of stuff that the pastor would ordinarily be doing, then probably they're really looking at needing an assistant pastor and maybe should start treating him that way. And that's why this would be a guy who would be a prime candidate for the SMP. Let's get you into the office, because that's what we really want you to do here. But if he's actually being a DCE who is just, you know, teaching women's classes and teaching some kids here and kind of organizing some Bible classes and making sure all this stuff is going on and organizing the VBS, that's a different animal. So it's going to vary a lot from congregation to congregation what he actually does or she actually does.
I just think in my vicarage congregation, it just seems like such a headache. You know, trying, well, I can, you know, as vicar, I can preach.
Yep.
I can deliver the word and do all that stuff, but well, let's get the pastor on down here in the Saturday night service, and pastors usually go to Saturday night service. So we had sacrament like only once a month.
Right, but he has to bring his magic hands and do the sacrament.
Yeah.
And it's very annoying. And you see, and what's going on here is people don't get what's happening. And that's why I'm saying we need to have a lot more clarity. And if the DCE is starting to act at that level, then he's really acting like a pastor. And the congregation needs to come clean and say, you're being a pastor, you need to be SMP. We need to get clean here because you're actually into the office. But you're not really, and we're playing games here, and we got to quit playing games. That's what I would suggest.
But I think, like a real, like a use of the auxiliary office, like everything that you're saying, yeah, I mean, it's kind of silly to make the teacher into an auxiliary office. But like, if you were as church and said, well, this is what a pastor, like, if you're in the office, if this is the case, like, we don't have to, we can just reorient our definitions a bit, like, as church.
We could, but we got to make sure we're protecting what this is. All right.